Hi everyone, I'm Ashley. I'm a sophomore at UCLA. Some of my favorite rooms, obviously I've mentioned before, I really like Genshin Impact. But one of my all-time favorites is also Final Fantasy VII and Skyrim.
Yeah, okay. My name is Catherine. I am a third year computer science major. Ooh, very nerdy. I guess one of my favorite games right now has always been like the Legend of Zelda series. I've been really into Legend of Zelda. Breath of the Wild 2 coming out. Really excited for that. But yeah, I'm a huge Nintendo person. We do have a few volunteers here as well. Ellen, Haley, Vivian, Zona, and Christy. Please feel free to message our volunteers for help during our interactive activities today. All right, so I guess we'll just jump right into it. So, what words do you guys think of when you hear gaming or game developer? So we're gonna do like a quick like activity. So if you guys can like input maybe like one or two words to like this mentee word cloud, and then that's the link. Or you can scan the QR code as well. And just like we want to see what you guys think or like know about game developing or just gaming in general. And we'll give you guys like 1 or 2 minutes. And we can also see things coming in real time.
Very
Ooh, we have
cool.
that. Interesting. Okay.
Developing, coding, programming. Bad. Gaming bad. Smart, moving. Got Haley Kim. I definitely think of Haley Kim while coding.
Oh, Valkyrie. Yeah, streamers. I've
Yes.
been getting into like offline TV and like that group of people, but like they're pretty cool.
Yeah, ever since the Among Us craze, I have been following closely with the offline TV members as well.
All right. Yeah, Nintendo Interactive developing. All right. I guess we can move on. Thank you guys for your input. Yeah, so it's good to see what you guys like. I think you guys have like a really good idea of like what gaming is, like gaming communities with like streaming and like companies like Nintendo, and just like coding is a really big one. I think a lot of people put coding. And design, yes, as well. So perfect, because coding and design is kind of like a huge part of the game development process that we'll be going over in our workshop. All right, real quick, like what is game dev straight off the bat? So game development is the process of creating games spanning from like design, development, testing, and release of a game. So game developers work together to create stories, design, and produce the game. So who can be a game developer? So we have like programmers, sound designs, artists, and you. So you can even be a game developer. And really quickly, I'm just gonna go over like the types of game development team sizes. So we have AAA games. These are made by really large teams. And so I think it's like there's a lot of resources that go involved to making AAA games. There's a really large team size and a lot of money that goes into these games. So right off the bat, we can like see some like really well-known titles like Legend of Zelda, Mario, God of War, Skyrim, Assassin's Creed, and Cyberpunk. Though Cyberpunk will go over a little bit more later. We know like that was like kind of a tragedy in gaming. But these games have like a lot of resources, really large teams going into building them and making sure that like they're in tip top shape for a lot of people to be engaged with, and like really kind of like almost rake in money for the company. And then we have indie games. There are teams of 30 or fewer people. These are really small teams. It could be like even one person developing an entire game. So we have like games like Undertale, Stardew Valley, Hollow Knight, Hades, Cuphead, Overcooked. These are all like games made by really small teams, and they don't use a lot of resources. And honestly, you honestly shouldn't be like, oh, they're made by small teams, so they're not worth my time. These are like still very high quality games made by people who are really passionate about their project. And it doesn't mean that a small team doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful. Minecraft and Fortnite are very good examples of indie games that really succeeded. Minecraft and Fortnite both started off with like I think Minecraft started off with like one person creating it, and then just like small teams developing it, and then it kind of kicked off because they were really popular. So just because it's made by a small team doesn't mean that it's not going to be successful. And then there's games that fall in between. They're kind of in between like the team sizes, whether it be like resources, money that goes involved, or just like overall popularity. We have like League of Legends, Minecraft, and Fortnite are there again because of their indie backgrounds. People aren't really sure if like they can be considered AAA titles because they started off as indie games. And you have like Little Nightmares, which is like really popular recently, and Kirby and Dark Souls. So these are all games that kind of fall between. They're not quite AAA titles, but they're too big to be indie games. All right. I'm going to hand it off to Ashley.
And so given that we have so many different types of like teams creating different types of games, we wanted to cover the different stages of game development in order to show how all of these different teams proceed in approaching game design. Next slide. All right, so the first stage of game development is pre-production. This can be considered like the most important step in the development process just because it's where things really take shape. So at this point in the process, you're creating everything that you want your product to be. You're shaping the vision of what the game will eventually become and thinking about all the intricate details to ensure that the game is easy to follow and easy to play. One thing people often think about during this stage is, well, how can I convey my ideas to another person in a very concise way? And one solution to this question is through the use of concept art, as you can see in the next slide. So what you see on the screen right now is the concept art for Yoshi's Island, their mastered version. There are a variety of things that you can pinpoint about the video game that you might not be able to express in words. For example, the art's warm colors might mean that the game is more lighthearted in nature. The environment isn't very consistent, which means that there might be like an air of oddity or fantasy in the environment. Are those trees or are those bushes or are they just really fluffy hills? You know, there are just so many questions about this concept art that you wouldn't be able to convey with words alone. And this is why concept art is so important. It's like a prototype, except you don't even need to implement the functions of the game in order to properly convey what the idea of the game is. Next slide.
Yeah, real quick, wanted to add, like, you can also see, like, you know, in this, like, little, like, the shy guys kind of, like, interacting with each other. So you can kind of see how, like, you know, ideas about how the characters are going to interact with their environment and, like, with each other as well.
Mm-hmm. So after the conceptualization stage has finished, designers need to create art that'll actually appear within the game itself. Depending on what type of game it is, the art can be two-dimensional or three-dimensional. For two-dimensional art, sprite creation is an important aspect of making the game come to life. Without sprites, characters would seem frozen in time, and that's something we don't want to happen. And so sprites are created by placing pictures on top of each other and playing them one by one. As you can see on the right side of this slide, we have like all of these different pictures, but once you put them in sequence, they end up coming to life and creating animation. And so every element of the game requires some sort of movement, even if it isn't necessarily moving in a sense, just to recreate the idea that there is life behind this video game. And we'll see how someone can use software programs like Photoshop or GIMP to create such art. So the next stage of the game development process is production. During production, all of the ideation that occurred during pre-production is then given a specification of sorts in order to make the idea come to life. Oftentimes what happens during this stage is coding, making sure that the rendering of all of the different elements of the game is possible, character modeling for both 2D and 3D art, as well as audio design in order to make the entire thing come together. So here we have kind of a quick 5 steps to making a gorgeous 2D game, but we're just going to like skip to 040 and just take a look at like the different parts that the artist kind of thinks about.
Simple vector art, tracing the actual hit areas of the level. So I take a screenshot of the game in Unity, and you can also see this working out in games like Halo. Halo even starts out with a block out. I'll trace that screenshot with simple vector art, and then I'll clearly define
and the
edges.
next part is kind of at 305. We have, at this point of the process, the artist is using different types of colors in order to shade and create different layers that you can see as like depth in the scene. And slowly across through the video, you can see that the artist starts from a very basic design, but then he slowly makes it come to life, where at the very end, you can see that he ends up having, as well as like depth in layers, he also has different kinds of elements, such as and if you can go to 409. Well, at this point, he's just like adding depth with layers. And you can see that like he's basically just taking a lot of time in order to make sure that the environment isn't just like one layered. And hopefully, if you guys are interested in these kinds of things, you can search up the video later to check out the entire process of just designing this one scene. So similarly with 2D art, 3D modeling can be a little bit tedious, but this is a time lapse of somebody basically designing a figure of a head of somebody using a software program called Blender. And again, we're just going to like fast forward through most of this just to give you a sense of what's happening. And certainly there's a lot of manipulation of polygons involved, but the most important part is making sure that from all perspectives of this model, the model matches with what the vision is. Once you've got some model to work with, what you want to do next is actually create the functionality of the game. And what's wild about this is that this entire model takes about 8 hours, and even time lapse, it goes across like 14 minutes. So you can tell that modeling takes up a lot of your time. And so if you're planning on going into modeling, be prepared to just like sit down and grind it out. Okay. Right. So as we finished with modeling, the next step is obviously to create the functionality of a game. And one way to do this is through something called a game engine. But what exactly is a game engine? Well, let's see here. Development means the process of creating something, and environment is a setting. And now we have game engine as the software that offers a suite of tools and features to a game developer in order to build their games professionally and efficiently. To simplify that definition, a game engine is basically software that provides a developer with everything that they need in order to develop games. Let's take a look at some popular game engines. So the first game engine we'll be looking at is the Unreal Game Engine. It was developed by the founder of Epic Games, if you know Fortnite, in 1998, and has slowly become one of the most widespread game engines in the world, with titles like BioShock, Borderlands 2, Final Fantasy VII, the remake, and more. And if you click the slide, you can see that here we have a GIF of one of the cutest scenes in Final Fantasy VII. But yeah. And so the next game engine we'll be looking at is the Unity game engine, which was developed in 2004. Its creators largely had a vision of a platform that allowed just about anyone to pick up game development and just to go for it. The image you see here is one of the first games developed with Unity, and the culture of anyone can develop a video game led to the rise of many indie-type video games that Catherine mentioned before. And some well-known titles made with Unity include Ori and the Blind Forest, Hearthstone, Rust, Hollow Knight, Temple Run, maybe that's a little bit old, and more. And if chat can click the screen, we can see that this nice GIF of Ori and the Blind Forest was created with the Unity game engine. Okay. And while both game engines have their different pros and cons, which you can look into a little bit if you have the time, the one commonality between them is their use of programming languages to allow things to interact with each other and progress a game. In terms of general development languages, you can see precisely which languages are in industry right now. Unreal Engine uses C++, Unity uses C# and JavaScript, and Java and Python are included in general game development just because Java is something that people on the offhand will use to develop games, and Python is a very popular development language for visual novels. And finally, we have browser-based games, which will obviously use browser-based languages like JavaScript. HTML and CSS aren't necessarily programming languages, but they're definitely things that you should know if you're planning on creating browser-based games. And on the right, you can see kind of like a meme about programming languages, but it's kind of bad. So we can move on. All right, so the last thing we'll be covering in the production stage is the utilization of assets. A lot of the time, people will end up creating files for art or the setting that exists separate from the game's logic files. These are called assets, and you can import them into your project whenever you need them. Using assets is a good method of development because oftentimes you'll find that seeing backgrounds or items appear multiple times throughout your game, and all you need to do in order to have them reappear is to simply reuse the asset that you imported. If you're a developer and you don't have as much experience with creating assets, there's a large array of online assets that you can download and import to save time as well. However, now that the production stage is over, we can move on to the testing stage, which Catherine will be talking about.
All right, so you kind of code, you design, you do all that hard work, and you've made a game. But what comes next after that? So testing is a stage that comes next. It's basically a stage where you try and find as many bugs or just errors in your code that may not make the gaming experience quite as enjoyable. And so why is testing so important? So as we all know, Cyber 2077, don't know how to pronounce that, but that was a game that came out and they really rushed the testing process because it was just the best financial option for them, but basically it ruined the entire game. People were saying that Cyberpunk was virtually unplayable and it was just a buggy mess. They blamed the gaming industry and just like the hype around the game as well, which caused it to fail. The developers got death threats and they just basically pleaded with gamers that saying that they were human too as well. And you know, things were all around bad. It really just ruined the gaming experience. So like no matter how hyped your game is, if your game is unplayable in terms of bugs and glitches, it will just really ruin the entire game. And here are just like a few examples. Like this is like an example of like the graphics not quite rendering correctly or just like showing up the way that they want to do. It's like really messy. You wouldn't want to see this in like in a AAA title game where a lot of resources are going to. And with a AAA title, you're expecting quality work and you know, this is kind of a mess and you're kind of like, what's going on here? Another error is like, you know, you notice the guy's not even sitting on anything and he's just like floating in the air. So, you know, these are like minor bugs in terms of just looks, but there are like a lot of bugs in terms of movement and just like everything that just made the game unplayable and like people would like glitch and like fly around everywhere because the game just wasn't working correctly. But glitches are not all bad. Speedrunning is like a category that really utilizes glitches and just like not like poor testing, but like little like gaps in testing. So for instance, we see like, before I go into that, like speedrunning is basically playing a game with the intent of finishing it as fast as possible. And so there are certain categories like utilizing glitches, completing the game 100%, and just like people compare and like race against each other. So some instances where like gaps in testing might be used is like you can see like on the left Mario is kind of glitching through the wall just to access this door quickly instead of going up the stairs, and on the right we see that Link is shield hopping off of a enemy and he goes really fast because the engine isn't quite able to calculate the correct speed that he's supposed to go to because of a glitch. And so people really utilize these to make their gaming times faster and faster and beat other people. So it's not all bad. Communities can come out of mistakes. And here's some like various stages of like testing. We have the first stage, which is closed alpha. Basically, where a small group of users or just like developers identify bugs that may have been missed during the early stages of development. It's only open to a specific group of people. And so it's like, it's kind of might be the buggiest stage of the game because, you know, it's fresh code. You guys are really testing like the limits of like stuff that you coded and making sure everything works. And then you go to closed beta. It's really similar to closed alpha, but it's much more extensive. There's much more bug hunting, obstacles to smooth gameplay. It's open to specific people, but it can include hundreds to thousands of testers. There's also open beta, which is the next stage after closed alpha, which is a pre-release of the game. It's open to anyone. It's almost like a demo. They want to test live user experience, gather feedback from testers, and improve the game. Again, still searching for bugs and just having people play through the game. And if, you know, anything goes wrong, they go and fix it. And so here's like kind of like a comparison that might happen between the stages of like testing. So on the left, you see a image of Minecraft, I think in its closed beta stage. So you can see like the difference that occur in like graphics almost between like releases of the game. And then the picture on the right is Minecraft in its beta form. And so as an indie game, it didn't quite follow the original timelines, but it, I think Notch basically released the game in its alpha, beta, and like stages beyond that. So you can see like there are a lot of changes that happen between each like stages of testing. And so you do all that testing. Testing is a very tedious process, and you've done it. You can release your game now. All stages of game development are complete. The general public is able to enjoy the game. And, you know, you can rake in that cash with your game and like really like engage with your audience and let your dream go out into the world. So how long does this whole process take? It can take really long. It can take 3 to 5 years to complete a game. But you don't want to rush any of it, because rushing any of it will kind of just have really bad consequences along the line when you release the game to your users. All right, we're going to do like a really quick activity. Basically, we are going to have you guys plan out your own game as if you guys were creating one. So we're going to have you guys go into like little breakout rooms. And then you guys will be, we want you guys to introduce yourselves to your team members and then come up together like a potential game idea. So for instance, for example, who and what, come up with a character, create a story for the character, and what does your character do? Do they fight? Do they talk and move? For instance, let's say I came up with a character. He's an Italian plumber. He wears red. He has a cap with the letter M on it, and he jumps really high, and he's really known for that. And basically, I want him to save the princess from this really big bad lizard monster who shoots fire out of his mouth. And that's the story behind him. He's like a plumber that like saves this princess from this monster and like saves the day. And what does my character do? He jumps. He kind of like jumps on enemies as they go across the screen and like stuff like that. And then the where and when like describe the world that they live in and their role in it. Their role is like he's the hero, and like the world can be like, oh, there's like blocks floating around, and like it's a really grassy green kind of like, and then he can go like underground into pipes because he's a plumber. Enemies and objects, like the monster can have minions that kind of like go to like stop our hero. And then again, like how do they interact with world elements? Maybe he can jump and hit the blocks and like break them, or he can like jump on enemies and like basically like incapacitate them. So, and then why and how, what is your purpose of your game? Again, it's just like the story almost like, oh, I want to have this game so that like he saves the day at the end of the day and then like saves the princess. And then what genre? In this case, it would just be like, I'm almost say like, not like an RPG, but maybe just like a puzzle game almost. But yeah, so that's basically the whole idea. We just want you guys to kind of like come up with a potential idea of a game. So Ashley, if you want to make your, did you make the breakout rooms?
Yeah, so basically you're going to be put in a breakout room with one of our volunteers. And so I'll be opening up breakout rooms right now, and we'll be hopping around just to see how everything's going.
Yeah. I think we're waiting for one more group to return.
Yeah, so what we're going to be doing now is we're just going to rotate through the volunteer breakout rooms, and we're going to kind of share what we brainstormed. So I'm excited to hear about what you guys all thought of. All right, okay, cool. I think everyone is back now. And if the volunteers don't mind, we're going to just call out your name, and then if you want to either have one of your breakout room participants share, or you can share. Christy, your breakout room, what did you guys kind of think of?
First, anyone want to speak for our group? Kaylin?
So for our group, we're gonna set it in a post-apocalyptic world where it's kind of like a PvP kind of FPS shooter game, where each team, one side is a terrorist group, and then they try to collect resources like water, and they can be characters with special abilities like magic or transform into like a stronger character for a while. That was it.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. Apocalyptic world. Dang, that sounds like the graphics would be kind of insane. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And for Haley's group, if you guys want to share.
Oh yeah, Timothy will be sharing from my group.
So our idea, probably the best idea, is about a skeleton chasing a dog. And you're the dog, and your main objective is to steal the skeleton's bone and hide it so you can't find it. And we have,
God.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. And we have that's the main story, but we also have these side quests where you can hunt for food and play with your friends with multiplayer.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of insane. Not gonna lie. Maybe the best idea. JK.
Thank you.
All these ideas are amazing, honestly. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Timothy and Caitlin. I guess our group, if you guys want to share.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey will be sharing from our room.
So what we came up with is a game based on real life where you go around battling other opponents, but instead of actually beating them up, you argue with them. So the initiator starts off with an argument he or she could come up with, while the opponent has to come up with a counter argument to that. And so they exchange arguments until one gets frustrated and is defeated by the other opponent. So talking can physically affect you. So when you get destroyed by others' arguments, your health bar goes down. And that's what we came up with.
Oh, very reflective. Have a very big influence over our world. So that's a really cool idea. Thank you guys for sharing. And next we have Vivian's group.
Yeah, so each of the people in my breakout room made their own storyline. So if anyone wants to go ahead and share, that'd be great. Or Tony, if you want to go ahead and share your storyline. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but yeah.
So his name is Joe, and he worked in business and what's it called? It's like a post trying to survive and fight against other people and possibly zombies and what's it called? And the genre would be first person shooter and probably RPG.
Yeah, that's really cool. For the sake of time, we're almost to 1 o'clock. So if Zona's group wants to share really quick.
Oh yeah, I think Amy can share for our group.
So for our game, we came up with like a quest-based fantasy, and our like main character doesn't really have like specific features because their superpower is like shape-shifting, and there's like different resources you can use to like make potions that will give you like additional superpowers, and then you could also buy them if you don't have like the resources to make them, and you could also buy like things like swords and things like that. And then the main enemy is like his power is that he can tell who it is even if like the main character is like shape-shifted into someone else.
Ooh, okay. Sounds very interesting. Yeah, these are all super cool ideas, and thank you all for sharing. So the last thing that we have on our agenda is we're going to introduce kind of a little challenge. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about a few development terms that you might need to know. So as you can see on the screen, features, any additional functionality that isn't the most basic version of the game. Incremental testing, the idea that you should test as you develop and not only at the very end. And the reason why is this saves the trouble of not knowing where bugs originate from. So as long as you can make sure that this part of the product that you're testing is completely fine, you can continue developing with the knowledge. You don't have to worry about bugs coming from like something that you've developed in the past. Next, we have UI and UX, so user interface and user experience. So these are one of the most important things when it comes to game development, just because what you want to do when you create a game is to make sure that the users are having fun. So the user interface is going to be what the person interacts with and sees. And finally, the user experience is the process of interacting with your game. And finally, rendering is the act of continuously generating and refreshing a 2D or 3D image through computer processing. And so if you want to search up some more development terms, you can go to Unity's website, game development terms. Okay, but on to the challenge. Oh, oops, I was not supposed to stop sharing. Okay, so the challenge is, say that we have some specification of what a game should look like. And this is the game right here. So what I'm going to show is I'm just going to quickly demonstrate what the game is supposed to do. So I have the main character in the middle, and I'm just going to be shooting at enemies that come at me. And you can see that every single time I shoot an enemy, I can gain points that are shown at the top left of the screen. And so when I stop shooting and I allow an enemy to touch me, it ends up being game over. And so this is going to be the specification of the game that we want to create. And we're basically going to create it from scratch, starting from a white screen. And so can anybody tell me, given this game specification that I can drop in the chat over here, if you want to play around with it? Given that as the specification of the game, what should be the first few things that we need to do? And don't worry about if you don't know how to code. This is mostly going to be a step-by-step thing where the code is already written and I'm just going to be making it appear on the screen. Does anybody have any ideas? You can say it in the chat or unmute yourself. Awesome. Okay, so Jeffrey says make the background black. So that's a really good idea. We're going to first make the background black. And if you have gone to the CSS workshop, you might remember that CSS is the way that we can alter a browser in order to make like things change colors. Okay, so now that we've made the background black, what should we do? And you can look back to the code pen to kind of get a sense of what is there. Awesome. Okay, so Amy says you need to add the main circle. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the main circle. And every single time I'm adding code, what I'm doing is I'm refreshing the page so that it re-renders the browser. Okay, so this is really good, like all the setting in place. But the next thing that we need to do is, would anybody be able to tell me? So if we look back to our game here, one of the features is being able to shoot projectiles at enemies. Okay, cool. So Joffrey, yes, Joffrey says to let the main circle shoot, and Amy says add the other moving circle, so adding the enemy. The first thing we do is we move to stage 2 and we're suddenly able to shoot. The code for this is also in the code pen if you want to check out in detail later. But for now, we're going to quickly go through it just because we're almost running out of time. Okay, so we're just uncomment this code, save it, and refresh. And so now we see that enemies are actually coming at us. And let's try shooting at them. Oh no, it's going through. So what's the next thing that we need to do in order to make, closer to what it should be? Right, so they need to disappear when you shoot them. And I guess the best way to detect whether you shoot them is to make sure you check whether they're colliding with each other, whether they're touching each other, right? And so this is called collision detection. It's when you check to see whether anything is touching each other. So, okay. In this version of the game, whenever we shoot at an enemy, it'll actually disappear. And when you Right. The game needs to end when the enemy collides with the main circle. And so let's see if that happens with this. Okay, so it doesn't happen. And the reason why is we need to add this code. All right, so now the game should end when the circle collides with the player. And what are the next steps in order to, finish the game? And a hint for this part is now that the game is not ending. This is stage 3. That's quite odd. But pretend the game actually ends. And what would be, I guess, the incentive for the game to continue? Awesome. So Jeffrey says you need a game score. And so that's what we're going to do in stage 4. So now we have a scoring system where every single time we shoot at an enemy, it actually increases the amount of score that you have over here. But now that you can increase score and you can die as well, every single time I want to replay the game, I have to end up refreshing the screen. So what could I do in order to make the experience better for the user? Awesome. So somebody says the restart button, and that's basically what this will be. So this restart button doesn't actually work, but once we're going to the final stage, we'll find that, okay, so now we have this button, and when we start the game, it'll actually, start the game. And once we have the circles collide, they're really slow, sorry. But once they collide with the player, we'll end up finding that once you click start game again, you'll be able to see that it restarts the game and it starts from 0. Awesome. So thank you guys so much for following along with that. We're going to finish off the presentation with some review and resources. Oh yes. And so as this this is a really simple game, right? But we were able to complete it in a pretty quick amount of time. And it just goes to show that, if you're looking to create a game, you can definitely do it. We don't want to say that it's completely easy. There's definitely things that you have to learn. But yes, you can do it. Okay, so just as a review, we're good, but these are all of the different stages of production. And you want to follow them closely if you want to create a very good game. And resources for everyone who's looking to get into game design, for developers, it's pretty much every single project that you do will get you one step closer to the ideal game that you want to achieve. And doing something is not as hard as you might think, because you always know the steps to the final product. As you guys were telling me, we had that specification and you slowly gave me instructions in order to reach that final product. For designers, just finding simple animations or models that you can make and searching up tutorials on how to use software to do it will be enough. Some high school programs that you might want to check out and that might have a game development program are Cosmos, Carnegie Mellon's summer program, Road to Code, or you can also start a game development club at your school and just start projects from there. Finally, for everyone, main way that you kind of gain experience in the game development industry is just to draft ideas, maybe create a team, write out the specifications and set a timeline for your project, and finally just go for it. Everything is just, I want to do it, so I'm going to do it. And if you don't want to, commit to creating a full out game, you can alternatively modify existing games or work on open source games to gain experience. And that's pretty much the end of our workshop. Again, if you want to take a look at the code pen to see all the code related to our game, the link is in the chat. Making a game can be as easy as that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the workshop. So happy that everyone came and shared their ideas.
Yeah, the first step is just to get started. So it doesn't have to be your dream game at first, but we all start somewhere. So you can start today, you can start whenever you want, but we hope that you guys kind of are coming out of this with a little bit more knowledge of how games work and maybe pursuing game development in the future. But yeah, make sure you guys head over to the closing ceremony that's happening, I think, right now. But thank you guys for coming. We'll stick around for questions, but definitely check out that closing ceremony.